In this podcast, you will hear Loretta Rymer Williams as she channels the legendary Irish firebrand Mother Jones. Mother Jones shares stories of her birth, her life, and finally her burial in Union Miners Cemetery in Mt.Olive, Illinois. Listen to the end to learn a little-known detail about opening her casket and a nip of whiskey.
Got on a ship, one of those coffin ships, crowded onto it, not knowing whether or not we'd ever see land again. I was born Mary Harris in Cork, Ireland, baptized in the Catholic Church at North Cathedral in Cork on August 1st, 1837. My parents were Richard Harris and Ellen Cotter. They married and had 5 children. Before the Great Famine, Cork was a bustling city. It was beautiful. But then there was a famine, a horrible famine, where people didn't have enough to eat out in the country. And so they would come into the city trying to find food and work. And there wasn't any. And they began to die. They would fall out on the street, just like walking bones. You would see them coming and walking skeletons, and they would fall. You'd walk down the street and you'd see a bag of rags, and you'd think it was rags someone had thrown out, and it was a body. So people began to go to America and Canada, different countries, to escape the famine. Here they're waiting on the quayside, waiting for a ship taking what they had. In the meantime, those who were in Cork, they would go to the soup kitchens. They were called soup depots. And you would get 1 liter of soup. Even Queen Victoria came to Cork. She was wealthy. They say that God brought the pestilence, but England brought the famine. So right in the middle of the famine, no one had any work. So my father and my older brother got on a ship, one of those coffin ships, crowded onto it, not knowing whether or not we'd ever see land again, and went to Canada. And they found work on a railroad in America. And then when they had made enough money, Mother Ellen took her children, her 4 remaining children that she had kept alive in Cork, and put them on a ship and brought them to America, where she could raise them safely. Around 1851, Ellen Harris took her 4 children on board a ship and went to Canada to meet her husband and her oldest son. And there they lived in Toronto, where the children went to Catholic schools. And Mary got her teaching certificate. Now you know what a teaching certificate was in those days. She didn't finish her education, no, but she got a teaching certificate. It was a letter from the priest that said she was of good character, and she got a job in Michigan. And there she taught little children at a Catholic school, but she didn't like it. And the Great Civil War was just beginning. It was 1861, and she went to Memphis, where she met her husband, George Jones, who was an iron molder. An iron molder took melted iron and poured it into molds. During the Civil War, it was a very stable life in Memphis. Our home was on Winchester Street. It was a swampy, poor part of the city. And I had 4 children, Catherine, Elizabeth, Terence, and Mary. But in 1867, the great yellow fever struck. It was coming in to Memphis, and we heard that it was coming up from New Orleans. But we couldn't escape. There was no place for us to go, so we had to endure it. We didn't know what was causing the yellow fever. It was mosquitoes. My 4 children and my husband died, and there I was, alone and penniless, with nothing left in Memphis. So I packed up and I went to Chicago, where I took up my dressmaking. But again, trouble followed me. And there was the great Chicago fire. I was just starting to get things built up, and the fire took my business and my home, burned everything. I had nothing left. I attended meetings organized by the largest union in America, the Knights of Labor, and they influenced me. There was the great railroad strike and the Haymarket affair. I had only one goal in life: to stir up the dormant rage of the oppressed workers and help them achieve a better life for themselves and for their families, to get out from under the oppression of capitalism, and let the workers rise up. There were lots of fights, but they stood strong and brave. The Knights of Labor, the largest union in the late 19th century, strong influencer in the American way of life. Harris played a significant supporting role for the cause of Coxey's Army, a march of the unemployed workers. And then there was the new socialist paper, Appeal to Reason. And Mary would write articles and have them printed. Made it a big success. A pyramid of the capitalist system. We tried to change it, where capitalism is the money at the very top. And then all the people telling how good it's going to be, and you can have a wonderful job, because all of the wealthy are piled on top of the backs of the workers. The laborers are at the very, very bottom of the capitalist pyramid. Violence was not a rarity. In Verdun, it left 7 miners and 4 security guards dead. Mary wasn't perturbed. She went headlong into the most dangerous situations, driven by the belief that the poorer classes had to stand up to those rich people. She was a small number of the unpaid United Mine Workers. She traveled extensively to rally union support. Workers walking to their death, a day of blood. In 1912, 1913, there was a coal strike in West Virginia, and the workers walked off their job. The families were evicted and had to live in tents. Tensions escalated when I arrived. I marched into a dangerous no man's land. In July, 16 people were killed. There was a battle between the miners and the guards that had been employed by the mine owners. Martial law was declared. I raised funds and organized women to harass those strike breakers. We would march up into the mines at night with our mops and our brooms because they were afraid of women. It was they were very superstitious, and they thought it was dangerous for women to be in the mines. Martial law was declared in September. Cabin Creek and Pate Creek were the center of the tensions. And then early in 1913, I tried to bring a petition to Charleston and was arrested and thrown into jail again. Calls were made to the newspapers. They begged for my release. And finally, after 3 months, they relented and let me out. The strike had then been settled. In 1913, I was up in Michigan. I'd been called there to help with the strike. The Colorado Coal War began. It was a bitter and tragic dispute. And I met the revolutionary Pancho Villa in Mexico and sought his help, not allowing strikebreakers to cross over the border. While there, the worst atrocity of all occurred. The Ludlow Guards attacked the women and children. 26 people were killed, and most of them were women and children. There was a major uproar, and the United States Army was ordered in to keep the peace. They released me from jail and ordered me away, but I came back. The mines were owned by the Rockefellers. She was arrested during the coal strike in West Virginia. In 1912, I was at the house in Pratt, West Virginia, where I was kept in detention. In 1892, she was shot at, and the very hotel she was staying in was set fire to. The authorities everywhere dreaded her arrival, and they tried to silence her. The district attorney, Reese Blizzard, he dubbed her the most dangerous woman in America. And here's a cartoon showing President Theodore Roosevelt running from Mary. And it says, "I see you, Mr. President," says Mary. And Theodore Roosevelt said, "But I saw you first, Mother Jones." The young boys who go into the mines. I highlighted the abuses of the children. More school, less hospital. We want to go to school. We seek justice. And I appeared at a U.S. Senate inquiry and highlighted the despicable treatment of the miners. I had pneumonia in 1903, and then they said that I was weak. Weak? Me? So I resigned from the Union and I joined the Socialist Party in Illinois. I was one of the founding members of the IWW, Industrial Workers of the World, the Wobblies. And in 1907, I was raising funds for the Mexican revolutionaries. By 1911, I'd become frustrated with the Socialist Party and returned to the United Mine Workers. And then I became embroiled in two very desperate disputes. And they kept me in detention. But it wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. They'd capture me and put me away in terrible, terrible situations. Once I was put in a basement cell with nothing to defend myself with but a beer bottle against those dirty rats. I led demonstrations through the snow in Denver, Colorado. Mt.Olive sent money for shoes for the children and women in West Virginia and in Colorado. But they didn't have anything. The shoes arrived in December, and the children thought it was a Christmas present. In Mexico, I met Pancho Villa, and I became fast friends. Again, the newspapers would post terrible things, how they were ousting Mother Jones, and I was in trial. I would defy the governor. But then 500 women cheered for Mother Jones. I was very rarely out of the headlines. She didn't mind being buried with whiskey. It's what her boys would have liked. I was born in 1837 and died in 1930. I had a lovely funeral in Washington, there at St. Gabriel's Church, and Father Sweeney performed the Mass. And then they had an entire funeral car for me, loaded me on the funeral car, and brought me to Illinois, here to Mt.Olive, to the Union Minor Cemetery. My funeral here was broadcast over WCFL radio out of Chicago. Thousands and thousands of people came to my funeral. And here it is, my gravesite. I didn't have a vault, but I had a fine casket. And they put me in it. Here I am at the Church of the Ascension in Mt.Olive. Thousands couldn't fit inside the little church. They gathered outside. They had a big parade marching out to the cemetery. 40,000 people were in that parade. In Cork, they had put in an article about my passing. It's how they broke the news to the people in Ireland. Joe Ozanek helped prepare the model for my new monument there in the Union Minor Cemetery. Later, after the new monument was prepared, they opened my grave, and the men took me out, and they opened my casket. Well, how would you like to be opened up and looked at after all those days? They said I looked just the same as when they put me in. They covered me back up, took me to my new resting place. And before that, the boys all took a little nip of whiskey and put the bottle in the casket with me. And to this day, that bottle of whiskey rests with me in my grave there in Mt.Olive. She didn't mind being buried with whiskey. It's what her boys would have liked. Pray for the dead, but fight like hell for the living.
I hope you enjoyed this podcast. It was brought to you by Jase Media Service and the Redneck Historian for the Friends of Mother Jones Museum and Union Minor Cemetery, both located in Mt.Olive, Illinois. For more information on Mother Jones, see Mother Jones Museum, Mt.Olive.org.